CNN had on Bill de Blasio to talk about how right-wing media has shaped the conversation in the U.S. Now, this interview was done by Brian Stelter on his CNN show, Reliable Sources. And it's the perfect example of how corporate media, that is not Fox News, corporate media like CNN and MSNBC, how they always frame the discussion from the right-wing perspective. So let me show you the first clip here. I have 3 to show you, but this is just the intro, and let's get down to it.
If you ask New York City's mayor what lies behind a lot of the negativity and the divisiveness gripping this nation, he's got a simple answer for you. He says it's the media empire of Rupert Murdoch that's at fault. Bill de Blasio has long been a critic of the hometown New York Post newspaper. Murdoch has owned it for years. He says it's right-wing propaganda. Now he's also been talking about Fox News as well, of course, on a week when Laura Ingram's hateful comments are in the news. This critique of right-wing corporate media coming from the left may have appeal in the 2020 Democratic primary, but isn't it rather Trumpian?
Absolutely ridiculous. How can you possibly compare what Fox News does, what Laura Ingraham did last week, where she talked about the scary changing demographics in the U.S.? How can you possibly compare that to CNN covering the Mueller investigation? They're not the same thing. So this is what the corporate media always does. Because the right wing outrages about every little fucking thing, what it ends up doing is it shifts the conversation to the right. So now people are focusing on oh yeah, fake news, because Donald Trump's calling out CNN fake news. That is the same thing as Laura or that's an equivalent to the left complaining about Laura Ingraham pushing racial division on Fox News. Those are not the same thing. They are clearly different. So why does the media keep accepting the right-wing framing on this narrative? Now, to me, this goes completely in the face of people that say that corporate media is paid to do this, that they're paid, that they knowingly are framing discussions from the right or from a corporate perspective. I don't think they do. I don't think Brian Stelter has ill intention here. I think he is honestly just in a bubble and he is not aware of it. So that's how he frames the discussion. He thinks he's being neutral by comparing Donald Trump complaining about CNN fake news to Bill de Blasio complaining about racial division on Fox News. He thinks he's being objective in that. What he is actually being is in the middle of a right-wing perspective. So it's just completely false. Now let me play the next clip where Bill de Blasio makes his case, and I think he makes a really good one.
What is your critique of Murdoch? You were quoted recently by The Guardian saying, imagine the country if Murdoch had never had papers or networks here.
Right. We would be a more unified country. There would be less overt hate. There would be less appeal to racial division. I guarantee it, because what Murdoch did through Fox News and the New York Post, among others, is to create a dynamic where that stuff could come out in the open. We saw it in New York City for years and years, where race was infused into the dialogue in a very negative way, and it was a sort of an apocalyptic vision was created of the notion of going back to a time of crime and decay, and always putting that through a lens of people of color as the villains. Whether you're talking about Central Park 5 or so many other instances, certainly you saw that around the election of David Dinkins in New York, the way he was vilified by the Post throughout his mayoralty. But you've seen it on a national level as too. They don't just dog whistle, they go a lot farther than that. They put race front and center, and they try and stir the most negative impulses in this country. There is no Donald Trump without News Corp. I firmly believe that. He never gets to the presidency because he was never been elevated the way he was consistently for years and years. So I believe in a free, strong media with diverse views. I'll defend it with all I got. But we have to be able to call out when a particular company has a corporate agenda, has a political agenda, and has very effectively changed the American discourse. And by the way, when I was growing up with, I think, some real heroes of journalism, Walter Cronkite's an obvious one, and Murrow and so many others before him, they set a tone of evenness, respect. The civil rights movement of the 60s got a fair hearing because the American media gave them that opportunity to be heard. Today, you have one outlet and one outlet only that is constantly sowing division. And we should be able to talk about that.
So this to me is the most basic take of all time. Now, that's not to say anything bad about Bill de Blasio. What he's saying is incorrect. What he's saying is correct. But it's nothing new. It's nothing crazy. This is sort of standard. Everyone should understand this. Everyone should know that absolutely there would be no Donald Trump, President Donald Trump, without News Corp. 100%. So what Reagan did in the 80s by getting rid of the fairness doctrine, what it allowed is a company like Fox News or like News Corp to come up and produce Fox News and create this completely one-sided perspective, not even an attempt to be objective to the facts, just completely one-sided view. And we have seen the result of that. So in Canada, as an example, we still have our fairness doctrine, our version of the fairness doctrine. And we don't have the same sort of negative discussion that the US does, at least in terms of... So, look, there's always going to be things you can pick apart. So, yes, we have a Doug Ford as premier in Ontario. And honestly, I think a lot of that is because of the fact that the internet has allowed a lot of these insane right-wing views to be more, to push more to the surface. But for 30 years, we had a very civil discourse about politics in Canada. And we don't have a Donald Trump. We don't have serious racial divisions the same way the U.S. does. Now, that's not to say that we don't have our issues with how we treat Indigenous people or how people of color are treated here, but it's not to the same degree as it is in the U.S. It just isn't. And I think I'm a firm believer that it's because we have more control over what news is allowed to be in Canada than the U.S. does. So this is just the most basic take possible. What Bill de Blasio is saying is absolutely correct. Yet Brian Stelter, as I'm going to show you here, continues pushing back on it. So this is a combination of a few different clips where Brian Stelter comes back at Bill de Blasio for literally no reason.
I'm saying because they exist, we've been changed for the worst. Now, if you said...
But isn't that like saying they're fake news or they're an enemy of the people?
No.
There's lots of media critics out there, but politicians make lousy media critics. Why do you feel it's your role to be calling out a newspaper because you don't like the content?
When it comes to News Corp, they have a political mission, and we have to be able to talk about it. So my
But
view
singling
is,
out News Corp, it's like Trump singling out CNN.
Oh,
Two
it's-
wrongs don't make a right.
No,
Two
couldn't-
versions of something bad aren't.
Couldn't disagree.
Because I think Bernie Sanders hit on a vein when he attacked the corporate media in 2016. It makes me wonder if you view this as a wedge issue or a campaign issue.
I've been talking about the corporate media since the 1980s.
That's true. You
Okay,
have been. You have been.
I sometimes say the New York Times takes an elite view of the world too often. I don't think that's a news flash, but I respect what they do and I respond to what they do. But if we have a force in our society that has fundamentally changed us, just again, think of that equation: a world without News Corp, a world with the kind of reporting, both sides, and a real devotion to objectivity that was the norm up through the 1970s in this country, what would we look like today? I guarantee you Donald Trump would not be president, and I guarantee you that what we're seeing today in Washington, the right and the alt-right and the negativity and the division coming out in the fore and feeling it has license, that wouldn't be true. And that's good when those forces don't feel they have license.
I still think politicians make lousy media critics.
We
though.
may, but if you're someone who has a belief system, as I do, you can't stay silent if you see something not being recognized.
All right. Brian Stelter, these points that he makes, they aren't even arguments. So this one that he says multiple times, politicians make lousy media critics. What does that mean? What does that mean? You're not forming any sort of argument against anything Bill de Blasio is saying. You're just saying, well, you're a politician, so I'm not going to even listen to you because you're a politician. How is that a stance? This almost feels like Brian Stelter feels like his job is in jeopardy because he's the media critic. And sorry, Brian, I think people that are employed by corporate outlets like CNN make lousy media critics. So Bill de Blasio is clearly making a better argument as a media critic than you are about right-wing media. Again, look, so people are going to be angry that I'm not talking about corporate news, corporate media. Well, that's also a problem. The way CNN frames things is very elite based, looking at how policy benefits the elites. That's how MSNBC and CNN do their news. But when it comes to Fox News, they're clearly in a category of their own. They push racial divisions. They lie constantly, or they massage the truth to form their right-wing perspective and essentially to brainwash an entire mass of people. That is clearly in its own category, separate from corporate media. That's not to say corporate media is good, or CNN is good, or MSNBC is good. It's good to critique those networks as well. But understand that there is a difference between what Fox News does and what CNN and MSNBC do. And I forgot to mention in the last, before the last clip, that we also have hate speech laws in Canada, and I think that is also added to our dialogue around issues here, around political issues here, compared to the U.S. Now, some other things I want to hit on here. So yeah, what I'm really curious about, because I don't know the answer to this. I don't know if Brian Stelter here is playing stupid, or I'm sorry, I don't know if Brian Stelter is stupid or if he's playing devil's advocate. So if he's playing devil's advocate, I guess you could at least make an argument for, well, he's just coming at you from the right-wing perspective and allowing Bill de Blasio to knock down your ridiculous arguments. Fine. But that isn't what it sounded like Brian Stelter was doing. I mean, he voiced his own opinion there. I still think politicians make lousy media critics. So I think he's just stupid. And I don't mean stupid, I mean in a bubble stupid. He's not able to see outside his own perspective. I don't think Brian Stelter is a terrible guy. I just think he's completely unaware of where his view is coming from.